Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Ron Hasn't Seen. It's October, so I'm going to kick off Halloween season with a series of horror movies I haven't seen. And today, we're kicking off with one of the big ones, jumping right into it with John Carpenter's 1978 Halloween. Not Rob Zombie's 2007 version, or David Gordon Green's 2018 requel. There are about 5 separate timelines in the series, and I have seen some of the sequels, notably H2O and the first two of the 2018 trilogy. Despite the timelines that make the Terminator series seem linear, it's probably one of the most influential horror series of all time. Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th really owe a lot to Halloween. Uh, the film stars Jamie Lee Curtis and Donald Pleasance. The film opens 15 years earlier on Halloween 1963, where we see a 6-year-old Michael Myers brutally murder his sister in Haddonfield, Illinois. We then cut quickly to the present day with Donald Pleasance's Dr. Loomis is explaining Michael's case to a nurse on his way to pick up Michael from the mental institution to take him to some sort of parole hearing or something like that. Michael somehow has escaped. He now takes Loomis's car and drives, Loomis assumes, to Haddonfield. The next day is Halloween 1978, and Jamie Lee Curtis's Laurie is first spotted by Michael Myers when she's dropping off the keys to his long abandoned home for a real estate showing for her father. Michael begins stalking Laurie and her friends as they are babysitting and using the babysitting houses to kind of have their boyfriends over. Meanwhile, Loomis is trying to get people to help him track down Michael and explain how dangerous he is. As the night goes on, Michael eventually kills several of Laurie's friends and some other people around town while she's protecting the kids they were babysitting. Loomis eventually shoots Michael several times, knocking him off a balcony, to his apparent death, but when Loomis looks up, the body's gone. Very typical horror movie, but a lot of these tropes come from this movie. So the movie concept came after producers Irwin Yablans and Mustafa Akkad reached out to John Carpenter to direct a horror film about a serial killer who stalked babysitters on Halloween. They were a fan of his Assault on Precinct 13. Carpenter took the idea and wrote the movie kind of loosely based on the Black Christmas movie from a few years earlier that he was a big fan of. And his girlfriend Deborah Hill helped him write the script in a total of 10 days. The movie was shot for only about $300,000 over a 20-day period in May, and the film was notorious for its low budget, using lots of cheap store-bought props. The infamous Michael Myers mask is modeled after, or it's a modified William Shatner mask. It has Captain Kirk. The eyes were widened and cut out, painted, the hair was matted. And this is one thing I used to have to talk about professionally. One of my first jobs after college, I was working as a attraction host at Universal Studios, and I was doing the Earthquake and the Magic of Effects show. One of the things we would talk about was practical effects and how they had to reuse the leaves every night and have somebody gather them up because they didn't have enough money to just shoot with more fake leaves every day, shooting in May. So as I said, I've seen a few of the sequels, but never the original. Slasher horror isn't really my thing. I like more supernaturally monster stuff. My favorite horror films are like the original Paranormal Activity, the original Amityville Horror, the original Alien, and Event Horizon. I like the Friday the 13th and Elm Street movies a little better growing up because I like the campy nature to them. I thought they were more funny than scary. I just always found what you can't see and can't fight scarier than what you can, so just a kind of humanoid, human character coming at you was never scary. I like creepy more than jump scares, and well, this movie is really tightly done. The intro tells you you're in for something different with, just a 6-year-old committing this brutal murder, and Loomis's dialogue throughout the film, and Michael's just creepy stalking and disappearing add a lot of ominousness without really anything happening in the first half of the movie after that initial murder. The dialogue is very realistic. This is a lot thanks to Deborah Hill She wrote a lot of the female characters' dialogue, and it feels natural and, kind of very teenage girl. Um, but, I gotta say, the movie is full of tropes, like the teens are getting killed after the sex. It seems cliche now, but this is the genesis of slasher horror and these things we take for granted and as other horror series use them. Nick Castle played the Shape, the kind of unflinching adult Michael Myers is referred to in the credits that way. He's never called Michael that way. Uh, and he just intimidated everything. And despite being this big, muscular presence, he relies on a lot of ambushing. And it feels scarier in those moments than just because it adds those little jump scares, but it just, the quiet creepiness of it all compounds onto that. It's not going to be my favorite horror movie because it's not in my kind of subgenres I like, but it is incredibly well crafted and does everything it needs to be a successful horror movie. The mess of sequels aside, they have widely varying levels of quality. Don't detract, from making this a classic. There are a couple little things I noticed when watching this movie that I thought were kind of cool. First is that the kids, as they're being babysat, are watching the original The Thing movie, and Carpenter would obviously go on to redo that as a cult classic just a few years later. And there's a scene where the dialogue of the kids are bullying Tommy Doyle, the kid Laurie babysits throughout the movie, about his fear of the boogeyman. And they're just pushing him around and pushing him on the ground, going, "He's gonna get you, he's gonna get you," just being repeated over and over. That clip was sampled and used in the intro to White Zombie's "I'm Your Boogeyman" off the Crow City of Angels soundtrack. And of course, we know Rob Zombie, the kind of really the creative lead behind White Zombie. He'd go on to remake Halloween a few years later, so I always thought that was a nice, cool connection as well. Um, yeah, very well done. Uh, very creepy, very stalker heavy. So it's an interesting movie. It's in great. It's a must see if you're a fan of any horror, just to kind of see where we get a lot of these tropes. Obviously, it didn't initiate all of them. As I said, there were slasher films before this, but this took it more out of the exploitative kind of 70s genre into something a little more mainstream and solidified those tropes as what we would know as horror movies going forward. As I said, Friday the 13th owes so much to this. Before Jason became something more supernatural, it was just his mom, and the first Nightmare on Elm Street was creepy and not campy. But they lean into the camp, and I don't think the Halloween sequels ever leaned in that hard. At least the ones I've seen. H2O felt very tied to this, and the two Halloween and Halloween Kills were also very tight, and I think a little more well crafted because they're more modern and had a higher budget. The movie only, for a movie that only had a $300,000 budget, it went on to make $70 million at the box office, which is incredible. I know, horror movies are great indie films. They're because they have they could be done fairly cheaply and have a great rate for return. So this is in that. This really kicks those kind of things off. Well, that's it for my Halloween review. I'm going to be going to the original of another series of horror films, Child's Play, next week. I haven't seen any of these really. I've watched a little bit of, I think, part 2, like flipping through cable when I was younger, but never sat down and watched the whole one, so I'm looking forward to that. So thank you guys for watching Ron Hasn't Seen. Please like the video, subscribe below if you like what I'm doing here, and I will see you next week. Thanks again.